what are the options out there that the consumer has, young individual or young couple, maybe a young family? You say, I want to buy a home. How do you achieve that, right? And what are the options you have? And so when we looked at the options that are out there, whether it's renting and saving or the FHA, VA, USDA, the low down payment options that are out there, we really found that there isn't a good solution that really helps that first time buyer. There has to be a different path than the mortgage-based path that pretty much every home buyer for the last 70, 80 years has been taking. And that's what we've been building with Ownify.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Triangle Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Fagioli, and this holiday season, we've got a couple of fantastic replay episodes coming your way to enjoy over the holidays. They're all about housing affordability and creative financing. Some really interesting stuff that I think is going to play well into your business plan for 2024. So I hope you enjoy these episodes as you enjoy the holiday season with your family. And we'll see you back here in 2024 on the Triangle Real Estate Podcast. See you then. Hey guys, welcome back to the Triangle Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Fagioli. And I am going to introduce you guys to a new friend named Frank Rohde, who is running a really slick company. I get excited about technology in real estate, but I get particularly excited about technology that drives affordability, that drives home ownership into new angles and new corners where it wasn't reaching. And of course, in this new age that we're in, that's becoming even more challenging as prices rise and all of that. So let's please welcome Frank Rohde. How you doing?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me, Matt. Excited to be here.
Yeah,
and tell you a bit more about what we're up to.
Well, but before we dig into Ownify and all of that stuff, you've had a little bit of a storied past in the mortgage space and all that. Storied is the wrong word, but you've got deep roots in the mortgage space, as I recall, and I want to hear more about how because you came to this with some chops, is what I'm getting at. So tell us about your background.
Sure. I'm gonna go all the way back to my birth and hometown and upbringing in Germany, and then eventually made my way to the U.S. As a student. Went to college in Philadelphia, studied finance, and then through a variety of different gigs, worked for a consulting firm, started an online insurance company, spent a number of years at Fair Isaac or FICO, where I got deep into credit and how decision engines work and look at the consumer for underwriting purposes and all that. And then built a company called Nomis Solutions, which is where I spent the last 15 years of my career, originally as product and then as CEO. And Nomis was focused and still is focused on pricing and the basic question of how do you look at a consumer and how do you price the mortgage product in particular. So we built the pricing engine for a lot of the large lenders out there in the US and Canada, Australia, UK. And so as part of that, got really deep into the science and the analytics around the mortgage product and how interest rates work, how fees, points, loan level price adjustments work, and looked at a lot of data in the US market in particular, but really it's a global problem, global phenomenon. And what that data was telling us and telling the lenders that we were working with is that more and more first-time buyers in particular are struggling to get their foot in the door. Right? And when you look at some of the statistics over the last couple of years, the National Association of Realtors came out with their annual study on home buying behavior. And, average age of the first-time buyer is now 36. You go back a couple of years, it was 33. You go back another couple of years, it was 29. So folks are taking longer and longer to get ready for their first purchase or are able to afford their first purchase. And we saw this very consistently in the statistics we saw, the data we saw from the mortgage lenders we're working with. And so about a year and a half ago, set out and said, okay, this was great. I'm going to build a different company focused on helping solve this problem, specifically for the first-time buyer, and really rethink this core question on why do you need to use debt and a mortgage and large amount of leverage to buy your first home? Is there a different way in which we can solve this problem? And in the process, create an easier on-ramp, right? A lower hurdle for the first-time buyer so that we can start reversing that trend of folks are getting older and older, waiting longer and longer, right? Struggling more and more to save the down payment in particular. And so that's what we've been working on. My co-founder is a guy named Ben Harold, was COO at Divvy Homes, which is a rent-to-own company. And so we looked at this space and said, well, what are the options out there, right? That the consumer has, young individual or a young couple, maybe a young family, right? Where you have a decent income. A lot of times you have probably some student debt, and you probably have, credit card and maybe a car loan. So you have some debt obligations, and you're looking at Raleigh or the Triangle in particular, which is the market we launched. And you say, I want to buy a home. How do you achieve that, right? And what are the options you have? And so when we looked at the options that are out there, whether it's renting and saving, right, a rent-to-own platform, like some of the folks that are out there trying to do that, or the FHA, VA, USDA, the low down payment options that are out there, we really found that there isn't a good solution that really helps that first time buyer for a number of reasons, and we can go into the detail. But that was the kind of the genesis and the backdrop, and I guess long-winded answer to the question on the chops or the insight I brought to the table to say, there has to be a different path than the mortgage-based path that pretty much every home buyer for the last 70, 80 years has been taking. And that's what we've been building with Ownify.
Well, you answered the question great, and I wanted to get at the fact that lots of startups happen, particularly in real estate, I think, from people who have a good idea and they just sort of launch. But you had more than a good idea. You also had, the deep knowledge base of how that sector of the industry works, and brought to it, some background that most people don't. So that's what I was wanting to sort of jest out there. So tell us about Ownify. What's the opportunity for the first time home buyer with Ownify? Yeah.
So the problem we're solving for the first time buyer is one, the down payment hurdle, right? This is by now the single largest obstacle for first time buyers, is coming up with the down payment for mortgage based purchase or generally a purchase of a home. So the first thing we're solving for is lowering the down payment hurdle to 2%. So we're telling the first time buyer, you can pick a home, starter home, $250,000 to $750,000, anywhere on the Triangle MLS, right? There's a couple of constraints, but generally anything that's on the MLS is eligible. We look at it. You can pick a home and you have to put 2% down. So the first problem we're solving is this down payment hurdle of usually 10 or 20%. Sometimes you can get it lower with certain products. Second problem we're solving is, even though you're only putting down 2%, we can make an all cash offer, and we can be aggressive on due diligence, so that we're overcoming that hurdle, because the hurdle is not necessarily just the down payment. It's also leaning into the due diligence money, right? In the North Carolina market and the Triangle in particular, where in a still competitive environment, right, you need to have a cash offer and an aggressive due diligence component with that cash offer. So we can make a cash offer on behalf of the customer. And then what we're doing is we're telling this first time buyer, we're putting you on a path to ownership where you're buying fractions of the home, ownership interests, right? We call them bricks, over the next 5 years. And you're doing that in a way where you're guaranteed a fixed payment, and you're guaranteed no surprises, no incremental cost to that journey. So a single payment takes care of the cost of occupancy. It takes care of buying incremental equity, but it also covers taxes, insurance, repairs, maintenance to the property. And so for first-time buyers, when we did the research, there were a couple of things that first-time buyers worried about. One was, can I afford it, right? What's the down payment? What's the payment, the monthly payment hurdle? Can I afford that? Two, what happens if something goes wrong? So the roof starts leaking and I need to replace it, or the HVAC goes out and I need to put new AC in. Who's going to cover that? So people have this worry that you're on the hook for a big payment, but you also have this unknown exposure that comes with home ownership, right? And so we're trying to take that, or we've taken that off the table. And then three, and this is a really interesting one, and it takes a while to wrap your head around. What first-time buyers are worried about is what happens if home prices go down, right? What happens if I'm on the hook for a $300,000 or $400,000 mortgage, and all of a sudden my my home price, the value of the home that I live in, goes down and it's below that, right? What happens to my equity? And so what we've structured is this construct where you don't use debt, you just use equity to buy the home over time. And what that results in is what we call evergreen equity, or this notion that the consumer, the first time buyer, can never be underwater. And that's a unique construct, right? In the sense that with Ownify, the consumer doesn't owe a mortgage balance. The consumer has the ability to buy equity in the home, buy bricks over time, but there's no outstanding balance. There's no debt involved, right? And because of that, there's also no negative leverage, or there's no risk of being underwater on the purchase. So that's the value prop in a nutshell. So it's a 5-year program. You start with 2% down and you build up 10% equity over 5 years in incremental monthly payments. But those payments are an equity purchase. So you're buying effectively fractional interests or shares in the home over that 5-year period. At the end of 5 years, the consumer can renew and stay in the home, or get a traditional mortgage with that 10% accumulated equity as the down payment and buy out the remaining equity. So we really view it as an on-ramp.
You're basing that on the now current value at 5 years, right? So the investors who have partially funded this deal are going to benefit after 5 years. I say I want to get a traditional mortgage, I want to buy it out. Those investors are all going to profit from the presumed increase in value.
That's exactly right. So what Ownify is really a two-sided platform, where on one side we qualify the Oni, as we call them, the customer who picks a home, lives in the home, and gets builds that equity. And then on the other side we have investors, and those can be local triangle real estate investors who know and love the triangle and want to put money to work, or they can be anyone in the U.S. for that matter under a Reg A exemption with the SEC. So by virtue of fractionalizing these homes into bricks, or these ownership interests, we can sell those interests to investors, and those investors a value prop where they can participate in home price appreciation, right, if and when it occurs, and they collect effectively income, right, cash income on the home that the customer, the owner, occupies. So it's really, the way to think about it is it's version 2.0 of rent to own with true ownership, right, with true equity ownership afforded to the customer.
So who owns if I'm the ownee in this transaction, do I effectively own the home and own the rights to make modifications and paint the walls purple and put up a fence and all that stuff?
Yeah, great question. So what you are and what you own as an ownee is you have occupancy rights and you have membership or equity rights in an LLC that holds title to the home. So the way we've structured this path is that each home is owned by an LLC, limited liability company, and that limited liability company contains 10,000 shares, which are securities effectively, and the membership interest of one of those shares entitles the owner or the holder of that membership interest to 1 basis point, or 1/100th of a percent, of the equity interest in that home. So on day one, we call these interest bricks, right? There's 10,000 bricks. On day one, as an ONI, you buy 200 bricks and you build up to 1,000 bricks over 5 years. And so what you have legally is you have a membership interest or ownership of a fraction of this LLC that holds title to the home. You have a tenancy agreement with the LLC that entitles you to the occupancy and all the rights that come with that. And then you actually have a purchase option that allows you to buy the property from the LLC. Now, one of the things that we've structured with that is one of the big questions that first-time buyers are asking is you do have the rights to make changes to the property. So if you want to renovate the kitchen or add a bedroom or in some way or shape or form improve the property, make changes, you can do that. Obviously, there's some constraints, right? You have to do it legally, you have to pull permits, you have to get licensed contractors to do it, etc. But we're giving you a lot more flexibility than you would normally in kind of a rental situation have, right? And the benefit of any investments you make into the property accrue solely to the ONI, not to the investors, and that's part of the valuation model. So and this is maybe it takes a little while to wrap your head around. But if you, let's say you put $20,000 into a kitchen remodel, that $20,000 does not get added to the value of the home as you're buying those fractional interests. So as an ONI, you made that investment, it goes entirely into your own pocket, even though you are fractionally only, let's say, at 6 or 8 or 10% of the equity of the LLC.
That's really interesting. What about renovations paid for by additional bricks from investors? Have you guys contemplated that scenario at all? Like, I want to do $100,000 pool, and I want to go back to the well and sort of seek another 10,000 bricks or 1,000 bricks or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, you could do that. I think once you're talking about adding a pool for $100,000, you don't really need a first-time buyer offering. I mean, if you're in that situation, that's fantastic. Congratulations. Yeah. So you can structure that. I think right now, what we've done with the structure we've built is, this fractional ownership path that's really optimized for the first-time buyer, right? Mm-hmm. And in that scenario, you wouldn't go back and say, hey, do you want to add a pool, right? The correct answer for the first-time buyer would probably be, why don't you build more equity, right, before you put a pool into your house, with a mortgage.
Sure. I guess I was just exploring the notion of, can you go back and do some kind of additional financing deals? Does that provision even exist in your world?
It's an interesting question, and you probably have a property with a pool that you're thinking about, but
no.
The general structure, right? This notion, or what we've built here, this notion and the ability to fractionalize the equity interest in a home. Of course, you can use that to finance other projects as well, right? You could finance improvements to a vacation property, right? You could finance the addition of a pool, and to the extent that that increases the value of the property or the income that property might generate, let's say it's a second home, vacation rental, et cetera, you can use that similar structure, right? That's not what we're doing today. We're focused on that first-time buyer challenge. But the general idea of fractionalizing the ownership, right, I think has a lot of applicability.
Mm-hmm. What happens if the first-time home buyer is 4 years in and they decide that they're ready to move and they don't want to be the owner-occupant anymore? But I guess what I'm asking is there a scenario where that they can vacate and we could become a rental property, even though that wasn't their original posture? They lived in it for 4 years, or does it have to be sold?
So right now, the way we've structured it is that you have to live in the property, right? It has to be owner occupied. So it's not an investor product. It's really designed around the first time home buyer. So what happens, let's say in that scenario where someone lives in the home for 4 years, they've built up, 8% equity at that point, and they decide they want to move to somewhere else, or the job transfer to the other side of the country, we would buy out their equity. We would charge a relisting fee, effectively, which at that point would be 2%. And then we would put the house back on the market and sell it. That's the kind of golden path, if you will, or the path that we would take once someone decides to move on. Now, there are obviously a number of different cases. Could you find an ONI who's interested in taking over, right, and continuing to build equity? That's one scenario. Could you just rent it? Not our core business model. We really don't want to be landlords and SFR operators. We want to help people into their first purchase, right? But to exit, obviously, we've built that flexibility into the program to say, you're not losing your equity. We will buy back your equity at the same valuation that you've been buying it, so at the market, right? And therefore, there is possibly some return for the ONI in that as well.
Well, that's really intriguing. If I'm hearing you right, that it's kind of an easier exit. So, okay, I got a job. I'm going to move to California. It sounds like a pretty easy out if you're saying it's sort of an automatic buyback, except for the commissions.
It's not a commission. It's a relisting fee. And so, yes, we would charge that relisting fee, which means you leave money on the table, right, as an ONI, but we can't make it prohibitive for folks to exit, right? I mean, in any scenario, there's a little bit of a penalty involved. But, in the short term, if you think about it, kind of 3 to 4 years in, I think you're actually better off than if you had bought the property with a mortgage and then sold it and incurred, the commission that comes with that. a sales
Yeah,
commission.
I'm saying that's a real plus to me in terms of cash portability. Hey, I'm ready to move. I can extract my 6 of my 8% and walk, out the door. That's pretty appealing, I think.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
okay, so let's talk about why did you guys pick the Triangle to do this? You're obviously not a North Carolina native, but you chose the Triangle. There must have been some strategic reasons. So tell us about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, two, maybe three reasons. The first one is we did a, data-driven analysis of the top 380 or so MSAs, and Raleigh came out number 4 or 5, right? And that was based on all the fundamentals: job creation, employment, incomes, house prices, et cetera, and so forth. Um, Second, my wife has family in Raleigh, Durham, so we went to visit, and
Nice.
uh, and we kind of fell in love with the area. Um, and so that was probably the qualitative reason, and then the quantitative reason. And then when we talked, and so then the third piece we did is we did a lot of consumer research. We talked to probably about 1,000 consumers, realtors, agents, to really understand what is the challenge here, right? Why is this a market that has a problem? And so one of the things we looked at, for example, statistics, you look at the number or the percentage of transactions that are done with low down payment mortgages in the Triangle. It used to be around 15%, 20% of homes between 250 to 750. That's 2018, 2019. In 2022, that number is down to less than 2%. So the traditional path for the first time buyer, right, which is get a low down payment mortgage, just doesn't work in Raleigh. Yet at the same time, you still have a market where you can buy a starter home for 350, 400,000, right? So the math and the problem kind of came together. And then maybe the third reason is what we're doing here is we're building a new path that effectively is an alternative to the mortgage, right? Now, no one really understands how a mortgage works. But it's been around for 70 years. The government says it's okay. Everyone has used one. Your parents used one. So it's fine, right? What we're trying to do is build a new path here that has some complexity to it. And Raleigh and the Triangle in particular is actually one of the most, if not the most educated part of the US. So we figured that little extra, couple more people who have advanced degrees and understand math, and maybe went to one of the local schools, that really helps in adoption. So that's kind of the three drivers there. But yeah,
Cool.
my aunt living here probably helped.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And so you guys have been at this just this year, or when did you launch?
So we started about a year and a half ago. We spent a good amount of time in the lab building the product, building the platform. So everything is automated. If you go to ownify.com, you can, underwrite a customer. You can accredit yourself as an agent. We've built a bunch of tools around home valuation, the accreditation, social media, and content that you can use as an agent. So we've spent about a year in the lab building all that, and then we launched in May of 2023 with the Triangle MLS, right, as the market, and so far, good adoption. We've not really leaned into marketing. That's starting in September, October. PropTech South is one of the events that we're going to use to put our name out there and be in front of more agents and then consumers as well. But kind of organically, we're getting somewhere between 30 to 40, 45 applications a day. And about half of those are in the Triangle. The other half are going on the wait list. So we've got a nice growing wait list. We've got folks applying in the Triangle. And then out of the applications, we're approving kind of one a week for a budget and a purchase. And those are folks that are now out there. So there's, today probably about a dozen, 15 people or so out there shopping with their agents, looking at houses. We've made a bunch of offers. We've closed 3 properties. So it's still early, right? But we're excited about the demand we're seeing on the consumer side, the support we've had from the agent community. We have about 125 accredited agents out of the Triangle MLS, and they're starting to send us more and more customers, right?
So let's talk about that. So our audience here is predominantly agents and brokers in the Triangle MLS platform. So how does this work for me as an agent? I guess I have to get accredited, and how do the commissions work and all that stuff? How do I use this as a tool in my tool belt?
Yeah. The best way to think about it is we help you turn renters into buyers, right? Take someone who has decent income, decent credit, doesn't have the down payment, maybe doesn't think they can afford a home. We will partner with them, with you and your client, and make a cash offer. And so structurally, what happens is we are the buyer on behalf of the ONI, who's your client as an agent. Upon successful close of the transaction, you, the agent, get your full commission. So that's an important one, right? We help you be more aggressive and more competitive with a cash offer. We pay the full commission, and so that increases, the earning capacity and potential for folks out there. And then the third piece of the value prop to the agent community is you get the right of first refusal on the listing if the customer doesn't buy the property outright from us. So back to the example you mentioned, Matt, right? Someone lives in the home for 4 years, says, I'm going to move to Florida or California or wherever. We're going to buy out that person's equity, but we're going to list the home for sale. And the agent that brought us that customer and that home in the first place, right, gets the right of first refusal on the listing. Doesn't mean that, you have to take that listing. Maybe you don't want listings, but to the extent that someone's out there saying, okay, I can, benefit from this transaction twice, that's what we've engineered.
That's a big deal as well. You probably know this statistic, and it gets quoted and misquoted all over the place, but something like 90% of consumers don't use the same agent again because the agent didn't do a good job of following it up. So if you're handing it back to the agent, that's a huge win for the agent. So congrats on that piece.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're expecting the agent to do a good job too, right? So
Yeah.
I think this is, we're in this to play the long game. And I think my experience, Ben's experience, has been that the agent is the key to the transaction, right? First-time buyers this is a big monumental decision. It's confusing. It's scary, right? It's the biggest financial decision that most Americans make in their life. So the agent is the person who, provides the information and handholds the transaction. And so our acquisition path is really built around the agent, which is why we spend a lot of time building the platform to make sure that it's not just a consumer-facing website. There's an agent portal, there's agent underwriting tools, right? And the ability to track. Like one of the things we've heard from agents early on was, I don't know if a buyer is qualified, right? And until someone is qualified, as a realtor, I probably won't take that person all that serious. So I want to know that my customer is qualified, and I want to know what the budget is that they can afford, what type of home they're looking for. And so what we've built is a process where an agent can submit a consumer, right? And that consumer then gets tagged to the agent. And the agent gets real-time updates on, here's Matt, he just started his application. Here's Matt, he just passed his credit on his income check. And here's Matt, and here's the budget, right, that he's qualified for. And by the way, here's a tool that you have as an agent where you can now submit potential listings to see whether that listing passes our criteria and what the payment plan would be for that listing, right? So, so our acquisition model and our go-to-market motion is really optimized around the agent being part of the transaction, rather than trying to, kind of circumvent that.
Well, and at the risk of going further into this granular rabbit hole, I keep coming up with more questions. So, having done a bunch of investor work in the past, the institutional investors that I've worked with, they have a specific buy box that they're interested in. It has to be built after a certain year and certain lot size and no septic tanks and all these things. What does that look like for Ownify?
So septic is fine, and we've had our fair share of septic inspections. So know a bit about that. But generally speaking, it's single family homes. HOAs are fine. It's price point of $250 to $750, with some wiggle room on either side. We're looking for built after 1980 on less than 2 acres. So by and large, you kind of standard single family home. We do an inspection, obviously. Along the way, we have a bunch of tools that we use to pre-vet and pre-qualify whether something fits. And that's a tool we've built for the agents. So it's a relatively straightforward process to at least pre-qualify a home. Then we build the budget for the customer, right? And if the customer is interested in submitting an offer, obviously then we work with the agent to make sure we go through a thorough inspection as part of that. But we take that risk, right? To say, hey, we're putting down, due diligence money, we're paying for the inspection. And again, that's part of the value prop to the consumer is think of this as you're partnering with a professional buyer, right? Who has your interest at heart, but also our interest at heart and the investor's interest at heart. And because everything is structured through an LLC where the ONI is a shareholder with the same exact security interest as the investor, right? We're really representing that LLC, including the ONI's interest, right? Including the investor's interest.
So that brings up a couple more questions. So if you guys, Ownify is handling the inspection and I assume the appraisal as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
the consumer's out of pocket is 2% total. There's no other.
Correct.
Wow. So it's really appealing even more so when you start thinking about those secondary costs.
Yeah, I mean, closing costs, right? Whatever, if you have to put down 5% due diligence, and that's one of the issues that the consumer has, right? I might have a 3.5% down payment mortgage, but by the time I need to finance closing costs and inspections and, put down more in due diligence, that becomes prohibitive pretty quickly. And I could lose that money, right? If I don't close, that's scary, right? And we take some of that fear off the table to say, look, there may be deals we walk away from and we lose some money, but at the end of the day, if you do it right over hundreds and thousands of transactions, hundreds and then thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but you come out ahead.
Yeah. All right. Let's see if I can come to the end of my questions, but I've got at least two more. Can the first-time home buyer, can the 2% come as a gift from family?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So here's what's cool, right? You can use a gift, but here's what's which I think I was super excited about. We call it the rich uncle epic. Epic as in like, this is what we're building. Each home, once it's fractionalized, again, 10,000 bricks, right? We Ownify buy some. I personally buy some, right? As an investor, the ONI buys 2%, but then anyone else can buy equity interests, right? So if you have the proverbial rich uncle and you tell that person, hey, I'm buying this house, each brick is $35. Do you want to buy 1,000 bricks? You can bring in friends and family. You can bring in employers, right? We've had one scenario where an investor came to us and said, I want to do this for my employees because I can help them get into homes. And so we love that idea. We have another investor up at UNC who's working with a family and is looking to potentially pave their way into home ownership, right? So there are other avenues in which you can not just finance the down payment, but also have, your community participate in financing the home.
And new construction, okay? Are you doing any of that?
No, new construction is great. We have a local builder partner, and we've done, a couple of those. So yes, in fact, love new construction.
Man, awesome questions. All right, last question that I know I had on my mental list was, I've got a buyer and we're going to down the road to buy this house. Does Ownify become my client in that transaction, or how does that work?
Yes, we have a dual listing agreement effectively, or dual agency agreement, right? That we ask your agent to sign. So two paths. One is as an agent, you already have a buyer. You bring that buyer to Ownify. We will sign a dual agency agreement with you. We're legally the buyer with the ONI becoming a member in that LLC. The other scenario might be we have a customer who comes to Ownify directly. And we do have those 30 to 50 apps, right? A lot of them come without an agent. And then we partner those customers with accredited agents. So anyone listening, please come to ownify.com, get yourself accredited. And then we can send you leads as well to say, here are folks who are qualified through Ownify, but they don't have an agent that is helping them find a home.
Wow, that's really exciting too. Man, it keeps getting better and better. Frank, I went past my normal 30-minute allotment because I had so many questions because it's such an interesting approach and does so much for the consumer. And I think it's a fantastic tool for agents as well. And you alluded to it earlier, but you're going to be at PropTech South coming up September 21st. Guys, it's only a couple of weeks away. So guys, If you're listening to this if you're listening to this and you're in the Triangle area, you've got to be at the PropTech South conference on September 21st. And there's going to be a bunch of great tech there and a bunch of cool things that we're talking about. So check out proptechsouth.com. It's only $25. It's a tax deductible donation for the admission fee. And Frank's going to be there and a bunch of other cool kids. So Frank, thanks for being here, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. No, this was great. Appreciate you having me.